This, of course, brings us to, if we're going to talk about the women's suffrage movement, we most commonly start with the Women's Rights Convention that was held in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. It's important to note that this date is both too late. As we've seen, there was already some advocating for women's rights prior to 1848, including some talk about women having the right to vote. It's also much too early. We're going to see that Seneca Falls happens. There's some activism that happens before that. But for the most part, we don't see a huge growth in a women's suffrage movement until after the Civil War. This was a convention called by the abolitionists Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. The famous story is that they met at the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London years earlier, a convention at which women, despite their previous activism, were not allowed to be seated as delegates. And so instead, Elizabeth and Lucretia walked around London and talked about sort of the unfair treatment of women in the world political system. It is important to note that most of our knowledge about the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention comes from the white suffragists themselves, Stanton and Anthony in particular, who wrote the first history of women's suffrage. And so while Seneca Falls certainly deserves its place in history, we don't want to overstate what a role that it played. It was one of many conventions that were ongoing at that time to address a variety of social ills, including women's rights. The document that came out of the Seneca Falls Convention is known as the Declaration of Sentiments. It was modeled explicitly on the Declaration of Independence, and so it includes a list of women's grievances as well as a list of demands. There was only one of those demands that was not supported unanimously by those attending the convention, and that was the demand for women's right to vote. This was seen as a step too far, as too ridiculous, that it would make the entire event a laughingstock. It was Stanton, along with famed abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who emphasized that for women to achieve all the other rights, to get better laws that would treat them more fairly, greater equality, etc., that the vote was an absolutely key tool for women to be able to achieve that, and that everything else, in a sense, flowed from the vote.